The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. He spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then the man who was blind went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it's someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and you are trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he had found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. The Gospel of the Lord.
A while ago, I was asked to give a talk to a group of girls, and I was trying to figure out, gosh, how am I going to get their attention? Lots of things maybe to talk about, but how do you present it in a way that they'll really get it or be interested? And so thinking about it and trying to come up with something, and somehow it came to me to think of my sisters. And I was thinking, what was a movie that they loved when they were girls? And one of the ones that immediately came to mind was Beauty and the Beast. And for me, I was forced to watch this movie way too many times, right? The candlestick and the clock are good enough characters, but it's too much. Anyway, so I thought, well, maybe this is something, right? I've got nothing else. Maybe this is a good key in order to proclaim the gospel to them in some way. But I didn't want to watch the movie again. I really didn't want to. So I thought this time, why not try to find the book and read the book? And so I did. And I was actually really surprised. The book, there's a lot there. A lot that even I didn't pick up on or that didn't make it into the actual movie. Two things that I really liked about the book. One is you see the power of beauty, right? That beauty for this beast, it transforms him, right? Before then, he was living his life, he was doing his thing, and he's kind of rough and just kind of, he's there. But when he sees this beautiful woman, everything changes, right? All of a sudden, he wants to be different. He wants to be a better man. He wants to be more civilized and more, it changes him. And I think that's true, that beauty changes us. Beauty has the power to transform us. It really does. And then also, I was very impressed with this beast, how it talks about how he needs to develop virtue, right? And how he strives to grow and change because he saw the beauty, because he saw this beauty, but also there's real virtue here. And it describes in more depth and detail some of the struggles, the challenges that he has as he tries to become a better man, a suitable man. And eventually what happens is that he goes from being this beast into this prince who's suitable for this beautiful woman to marry. What's amazing and awesome, many things. What's amazing and awesome is that this woman, this beautiful woman, saw in this beast, she saw something that maybe no one else saw, maybe even he himself didn't even see. And she believed in him. And she was able to draw out this good man, this great prince out of this beast. We see here in this story and in all the readings today, this kind of, these two things set up of seeing and believing. Seeing and belief. In the first reading with Samuel, he's looking for the king to succeed Saul. And so he goes to Jesse's house and he looks at each of the sons. And the first one, surely this is him, right? He even says that. Surely this is the one who is to be king. Maybe he was the one who was really, really strong and powerful. But God says, no, that's not him. Goes the next one. We can imagine maybe he was like the brilliant one, the genius of the family. Surely that one, he could strategize and be a great leader. It's not him either. The next one, whatever his thing was, and the next one. And finally, you keep going down the line, younger and younger and younger. And who do they end up with? David. The youngest, the weakest. And it says that Saul poured the oil on David, anointed him in front of all of his brothers. It was almost like he was saying, this king will operate by God's power, by God's wisdom, not just by his own. All that David does, everything that he succeeds in, he does it because God is with him. That's the point. Not because of his own abilities. For Samuel, he saw, it's got to be this older brother. But he realized that God's ways are not our ways. God's thoughts are not our thoughts. That so often God operates in a different way. And he chose David. In the gospel, we have a more literal seeing and believing. We have this man who is born right from birth, he's born blind. Jesus puts the mud into his eyes, and now he can see. Lots of people don't know what to make of it, but now he can see. Jesus cured him, he healed him, he gave him sight. But not only just kind of physical sight, but what we learn as the story goes on is something even greater than that. That in his heart there was a blindness that was hurting him. And in his soul, Jesus opened up the eyes of his soul, and he was able to come to belief. He would tell Jesus, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. Seeing and believing, opening up eyes so that we can come to believe. In our culture today, there's many great things, for sure, right? Like, I don't know if I'd want to live at any other time in the history than what we live in right now. We've made so many advancements. We've progressed so far. We are really, really lucky. But yet, our culture and every culture they have blind spots, right? Our culture has a blind spot. We have weaknesses, areas that we still don't do well, and that we are susceptible to kind of going off track, losing our way a little bit. One of these areas, it is. You see it and I see it as well. In our culture today, we don't do particularly well with faith. We don't do particularly well with seeing and believing. It's harder for us. It's a weakness in our times today. I find visiting with young people, especially when I go to the classrooms, that this is the case, right? And it's not just young people, it's older people too, right? In your work, in your friends, you notice it very much there as well. What I notice is that, often they're presented with this bad idea, this false notion that either you choose God, faith, or you choose science, technology, right? And these kids are, and I am too, these kids are on their phone all day, every day. Who are they going to pick, right? Who are they going to choose, technology or God? Well, they can't live without this, so even if they mean well or want to, it's very hard for them to choose faith. But is that how it's supposed to be? From the side of our faith, technology and science isn't a bad thing. We're not opposed to it. We're not saying you have to make this choice, science or faith. But we would say that you choose both. Imagine reading Beauty and the Beast. Imagine reading that book and knowing it and being able to quote from it and everything, right? Imagine doing that and saying, now I've come to the point where I understand this book well enough that I don't have to believe the author ever existed. Who cares about the author, right? To be like, no, that's wrong. Give him some credit. Or her, I can't remember who actually wrote it. Give them some credit, right? And it's the same with creation. We study creation, we learn it, we understand it more deeply, and that's great. And we can do all kinds of things with that information. But it doesn't mean you just ignore the author or say, well, who cares, right? If the author even exists, who cares? No, this is his creation. For us, the scientific method in particular has helped us make leaps and bounds, right? It's helped us progress incredibly, and it's a real gift, thank goodness. Most scientists we know, they were Christians, right? This came out of the Christian tradition, and it's a great and a good thing. However, science itself has limitations. Science itself has blind spots. It can't do everything. Those who hold that I'll only believe what science tells me, you're missing out on lots of things. There's Richard Dawkins, a great kind of modern scientist. He was once asked, "What's the purpose of life? What's the purpose of life?" And his response was, "This is a silly question that doesn't deserve an answer." What do you think about that? It's a silly question that doesn't even deserve an answer. When you think about it, what's the point of that's probably something that you've thought about a lot. There's certain questions that science doesn't do well in answering. In some sense, I respect what he's saying, right? He's saying, as a scientist, you ask me what's the meaning of life or purpose of life, like I can't put that in a test tube. I can't run that through the scientific method. There's nothing I can do with that. And so in a sense, I respect and he says that's a silly question. But it's an important question. It's a valid question. We need to answer that question somehow. How are we going to do it? There's other parts of human life. There's other aspects of the truth that we need and that we're searching for that science can't give us the full answer to. What is the meaning of life? Where do we come from? Where are we going? What does it mean to love? You know, for some of you, many of you already, but some of you are looking like, who am I going to marry? Maybe you're thinking about someone, should I marry this person? Can you throw that into a test tube? Can you run that through the scientific method? Is this the kind of love that means marriage? You can't really, right? There's got to be other ways of approaching these kinds of questions, including the question of faith. Now, today I just want to throw out to you, because we're trying to think, what do we practically do with all of this, right? All of us, we encounter, it's hard to be able to open the doors to see and then to believe. You can talk to people, for instance, about the proofs for the existence of God. You can go through the ones that, like Aristotle or St. Thomas, or there's a whole bunch of them, right? Hundreds, maybe more. And you can try to do those, and that's good. And we should know some of those to be able to have a serious conversation about how do we start kind of faith with that question of the existence of God well. What I want to put out there today is not a proof for the existence of God, but just something that I think suits our times very much so, just in trying to open up that door. Maybe you've heard of Blaise Pascal. He's written a bunch of different things, and he is famous for throwing out there his idea that we call Pascal's wager. When I first heard this, I didn't like it. It was presented to me as a proof for the existence of God, and it's not. It's not a good proof. That's not what he's trying to do, I believe. But he, in coming to deeper faith, he just wanted some little way to help others to open up that door to the possibility of faith. And I wonder, particularly in our times, if his argument isn't even actually more powerful, more persuasive. Especially in helping, atheists, but especially people who would say that they are agnostic. In some sense, respect that, right? Many arguments for the existence of God, against. What do you make of all of it? How do you figure it out? Maybe in all honesty, I don't know. I can respect that. But at the end of the day, you've got to make a choice. You know, I don't know if any of you play poker, right? You play poker. The worst friend you could have at the poker table is someone who you're playing with who folds every hand. Can you imagine? Someone who will never place a bet. You know, I don't know. I'm not going to take that risk. I'm just never going to place a bet. Terrible friend, terrible poker player. At some point, whether for better or worse, you've got to put your chips in. And his idea is with life, at some point, like the question of God either exists or he doesn't exist. And you got to put your chips in at some point. And there's real consequences for either hand. So what he does then is he goes through just to break down what would happen. Let's say it's a game of poker, you put your chips in. Let's say you have the hand, you say, what happens if I say that God does not exist? I live my life as if God doesn't exist. And let's say it turns out, actually, God doesn't exist. So Nothing lost, nothing gained, right? You carry on your life and you're okay. But what happens, let's say, if you live your life as if God does not exist? You say, God doesn't exist. But it turns out, actually, he does exist. Then what? Then you're in trouble, right? You're in trouble. You lived your whole life not following God's ways. You're in trouble. It could mean that you will spend eternity in hell. And not only that, but it could mean that you've lived your whole life missing out on friendship with God, missing out on the wisdom of God, the love of God, on the transforming power of a life following God. Maybe you've missed all of that. Okay, that's one hand. Now compare that to another hand. What if you were to say that God does exist? What just if you were to play that hand? Say, okay, what if God does exist? Maybe it turns out God doesn't exist. Then what? What have you lost? Well, look at the Christian ideals, right? As Christians, we're trying to make saints. That's what the church is about, making saints. So what you've missed out on is that the church, what you've done, you said God exists, it turns out he doesn't. And your whole life you spent trying to be a great Christian, trying to be a saint. And so what that means is that you've tried to form your heart to be super generous like Jesus. It means that you've tried to love, to the very heights of love, that you don't want to be self-centered. You hate it, right? And that you're trying to turn yourself outwards. That you're even willing to sacrifice to love others, like Jesus, who says, no greater love is a man than to lay down his life for his friends. It means that you've been trying to love your enemies and to pray for those who persecute you. It means you've been striving for super kindness. It means you don't steal, you don't kill, that you try to honor your parents and respect them, that you value family life and having those strong, close connections in your own family, unity. Is that really a bad thing? Have you lost if you've spent your whole life trying to do that? If you said God exists and turns out he doesn't, I think you're still further ahead. And then the last one, if I say God does exist, and if it turns out he actually does, then you've won the lottery, right? Jackpot. God exists, and you get to be with him because you've been following him your whole life forever in heaven. You get to have perfect joy, perfect happiness, to hopefully be reunited for all eternity with family, with friends, with the saints, and with the angels. Wow. This isn't a proof for the existence of God, but it begs the question, you've got to place your bet. And which side are you going to place it on? And which maybe is there more there? What's the risk, actually the riskier position to bet your life on? In his wager, it seems to be, if you bet that God doesn't exist, you have much more to miss out on, to lose, than if you bet that God does exist. Not a proof, but it makes you think. And maybe for some people, especially today, helps to open up that door to the possibility of faith and belief in God. For us, this is part of our mission. Jesus went around. People, he was trying to bring them first to see and then to believe. And that's our mission in this life as well. How can we do that? Maybe this is one little way that can help us to try to move people along to seeing and believing.